Yes, most questions let's address to mentors.
Yeah, so okay. Share. How I can start to sharing this again for full? Is it okay, or I should do something with the presentation? Have no idea what's happened there.
I think it's okay.
Okay.
We can see it.
Something happened. I have no idea. Okay. So today we will talk about React components. First of all, we discussed state and props for the components, which component types exist. We will also discuss lifecycle methods, event handling, form in React. Also, I mentioned in previous lessons such attribute as refs. We will talk We will talk about it a little bit. Fragments, compositions, hook, portals, React data flow, and context. So, let's talk about, one moment, I will close my window, sorry for that. Okay, so let's talk about props and state. And what is the differences between state and props? Props, or shorter properties, and state are both plain JavaScript object, while both hold information that influence the output of render. They are different in one important way. Props get passed to the component, similar to function parameters, whereas state is managed within the component, similar like a variable declared within a function. So, what's one more things? So they are both objects. They are trigger after set changes, the state changed or properties changed, usually trigger rendering page, and all information will be re-rendered once again. And what's the important here? State might change only with set state. So basically in React, both these props and this state represent the rendering value. That is what's currently on the screen. Calls to set state are asynchronously. Don't rely on this state to reflect the new value immediately after calling set state. Pass an updater function instead of an object if you need to compute values based on the current state. How we can update state with the values that depend on the current state? Usually, we are passing a function instead of object state to ensure that call always user the most updated version of state. And let's talk a little bit about differences between passing an object or a function in set state. Passing an update function allow you to access the current state value inside the updater. Since set state calls are batched, this lets you chain updates and ensure they build to top of each other instead of configuration. So what we can see on this slide. Give me a second. I would like to highlight the next things about set state method. That the set state is moment. So both state and properties received by the updater. So in a like this. Okay. We don't have, yeah, as I remember, don't have. So set state might be optional pass an object at the first argument to set state instead of function. So we might the set state method pass two arguments. First, this is a state, and then callback function. It also might be looks like a state change function, like with previous state and props, and callback function. So the thing of set state isn't require. Set state doesn't always immediately update the component. It might batch or defer the updated until later. This makes reading the state right after calling set state a potential pitfall. Instead using component did update, we will talk about component did update a bit later, or instead using component did update or a set state callback, either of which are granted to fire after the update has been applied. If you need to set the state based on the previous state, read about the. We will talk about updater argument just a bit later. So, about force update function. So by default, when your computer state where your component state or props changed, your component will re-render. If your re-render method depends on some other data, you can call React that the component needs a render by calling force update. Calling force update will cause render to be called on the component, skipping should component update. This will trigger the normal lifecycle methods for a child component, including the should component update method on each child. Also, React will still only update the DOM if the markup changes. Normally, you should try to avoid using the force update because it's not popular method, and you don't need to use them usually at all. Maybe Mikhail faced with this force update often, but I didn't face with force update at all, actually.
I can add this note. Sometimes when we trigger changes directly on DOM elements, we need to update it, or we need to call force update. In most cases, it's a exceptional situation when we do that. It's not a normal situation when you use it, but when it's a complex system and you need to do some hotfixes, you use it. But in general cases, we should skip it, because if we need to update, re-render interface, we should pass unique key, or for example, or change state of the component. So it's okay if we didn't face this problem to use it.
Okay, thank you. So, component types. Interesting. So, ways how we can define a React component. React lets you define component as classes or functions. Components defined, components defined as functions you saw the previous lesson, and also we faced with extend React component also, with extending React component also like classes. So also the extending React from pure component, this is also like a class extend component defined as, it will mean that the components will define as a class and provide more features for both for React component extending or for React pure component. It provides more features which are which we will talk about it a bit later. And so let's take a look at the examples. So here you could see that how we can extend in React components from the functional, right? So here, this is two methods. They are pretty the same, but usually, more often, you will see that defined components from like a function using arrow functions, but you might see also with first example defining components, there are no any differences at all, but please pay attention that from all, from all project, it should be consistent how you define all components. So if you started using arrow functions, that please continue with this variant, or if you started using just regular function, please use only these methods. It will be better. It's not a strong recommendation, but just pay attention. So here you could see the...
I have mentioned that
we
will use Rob and stay together in React, right?
Sorry, I didn't catch it all.
I mean that Rob and stay is the concept in React. It's not separate.
Prof?
Props.
Props.
You mean props? Yeah.
Yeah.
We will use it, and both of them, either state or props, they have different purposes.
Okay.
Just fix that they exist in this right now. You will see difference, by the way.
So here the properties provide you some additional data about your components, and this is like, you know, for a function, arrow function, just regular function, getting attributes properties.
May it makes some one note according to regarding last question.
So maybe you provide elaborate on this question a bit more, or
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Please go on.
okay. So React component about, so yeah, here you could see the example of how we can create React component, extending it from React component. So here the only method you must define in React component subclass is called render. All the other methods described on this example, actually you don't have any, but for example, if we will see like something additional functions in this React component, right? They are optional, but render should be always render with a returning some values. So maybe you have something about React component or React functional component, Mikhail?
Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah. Do you have something to add about functional or React or classes React component?
What?
Could you add something about?
Generally, we talked enough, and I think we should go on. And later, I will add, because in this it's enough. I think it's a good explanation. It was a good explanation.
Okay, so let's go to the component lifecycle. So each component has several lifecycle methods that you can override to run code at particular times in a process. We are looking at the lifecycle diagram, and let's discuss each lifecycle, each phase of lifecycle component lifecycles. So about mounting, these methods are called in a following order when an instance of the component is being created and inserted into the DOM. So first, this is a construction. Oh, sorry, constructor. If you didn't initialize a state and you don't bind methods, you don't need to implement a constructor for your React component. The constructor for React component is called before it is mounted. I don't remember. No. So when implementing the constructor for a React component subclass, you should call super props before any other statement. Otherwise, these props will be undefined in the constructor, which can lead to bugs. So typically in a React, constructor are only used for two purposes: initializing local state by assigning an object to this state, or binding event handler method to an instance. You shouldn't call setState in a constructor. It will be bad. Instead, if your component needs to use a local state, assign the initial state to the state directly in a constructor. So then from constructor will be the next stages, which is called get derived state from props. This phase is have a duration, can I say like this, for 2 phases: mounting and updating. So get derived state from props is invoked right before calling the render method, both on initial mount of the subsequent updates. It should return an object to update the state or null to update nothing. This method exists for rare use cases where the state depends on changing in props over time. For example, it might be handy to implementing some new models component that some new component that compares its previous and next children to decide which of them to animate in and out. Driving a state leads to verbose code and makes your component difficult to think about. For example, if you need to perform a side effect, for example, data fetching or an animation, in response to a change in props, use a component did update lifecycle instead. If you want to recompute some data only when a props changes, use a memorization help instead. Or, for example, if you want to reset some state when a props changes, consider either make a component fully controlled or fully uncontrolled with a key instead. So if you'd like, you can reuse some code between get derived state from props and the other classes method by extracting pure function of the component props and state outside the class definition. Note that the method is fired on every render, regardless of the causes. That's all about get derived state from props. Here you could see the example of the implementation or how it works under hood. So here we could see the comparison between next properties and previous state. And if next changed data will be equal previous state, we will return null, as we discussed. But if they are not equal, so there then will be return an object with a data, some kind of this data. Okay, then after static get drive state from props, will be next phase, which is called render. The render method is only require method in the class component. When called, it should examine these props or the state and return one of the following types. React element, maybe array and fragments, portals. Portals provide a first-class way to render children into a DOM node that exists outside the DOM hierarchy of the parent component. As I remember, we should discuss it a bit later. So other few variants, it might be string and nulls and booleans or null. The render function should be pure, meaning that it doesn't modify component state. It returns the same result each time it's invoked, and it doesn't directly interact with the browser. So if you need to interact with the browser, perform your work to a component did mount, which is the latest phase in mounting, or other lifecycle methods instead. And keeping render pure makes component easier to think about. After render, after render phase, React updates the DOM and refs, and after will be next phase, which is called component did mount. Usually, component did mount is invoked immediately after component is mounted. Initialization that requires DOM nodes should go here. If you need to load data from a remote endpoint, this is a good place to instantiate the network request. So this method is a good place to set up any subscription. If you do that, don't forget to unsubscribe in component will amount in this phase. You may call set state immediately in a component did mount. It will trigger an extra rendering, but it will happen before the browser updates the screen. Such behavior guarantees that even though the render will be called twice in a case, the user won't see the intermediate state. Use you know what? If you will use such behavior with caution, so I recommend that you use this not behavior like pattern with caution, because it often causes a performance issue. In most cases, you should be able to assign the initial state to the constructor instead. It can hover it can be necessary for cases like models and tooltips when you need to measure a DOM node before rendering something that depends on its size or position. So you also see about maybe Mikhail might to add something about mounting phase.
No, we just, as you said, we need just draw in our minds that component have three faces: mounting, updating, and unmounting. So, and firstly, we should need to see mounting is a constructor, render and did mount and get deriv state. It's sometimes it's quite complicated issue moment to understand React at first. In first introduction of life cycle. So constructor, render, and component did mount. Component did mount. It's have a second method. It's unmounting, and between them it's updating. If students will see in such perspective, it will be enough for, for right now, if we can say so.
Okay.
And should component update, it's yeah, in the second next slide I saw should component update. In this moment we should know about component and per component. And also shell comparing that nested objects, it's is not compared, I think. So
okay, yeah, so as we discussed, get derived state from props. Yeah, so we discussed from updating should component update. So use should component update to let React know if a component's output isn't affected by the current change in state or props. The default behavior is to re-render on every state change, and in the vast majority of cases, you should really rely on the default behavior. Should component update is invoked before rendering when new props or state are being received, default to true. This method isn't called for the initial render or when force updated is used. This method only existing as a performance option optimization. Do not rely on it to prevent rendering. And this, and this can lead to bugs. Consider using the built-in pure component instead of should component update. By hand, pure components performs a shadow comparison of props and state and reduce the chance that you skip a necessary update. If you are confident to write it by hand, you might compare these props with next props and this state with next state and return false. To tell React the update can be skipped. So that's why you see this implementation. Note that rendering false doesn't prevent child component from rendering when their state changes. So we usually do not recommend doing deep equality check to use JSON stringify in this should component update. It is very inefficient and will harm performance. So, and render state we discussed a bit. Get snapshot before update.
Sorry, Katarina.
Yep.
I would like to ask more about should component update. As my point of understanding, so the method is used when we have props or state change. Is it right?
So
about should component update, we use the method when we have the props or state change. Is it correct?
Mikhail, could you please elaborate on this method a bit more? Because as I understand, it's not you don't need to necessarily use this should component update because this is like one phase of rendering of lifecycle React component. This is like you might because this is an updating state, it's like before and after. So this is like middle phase, and you shouldn't. Maybe Mikhail might be better to explain it.
What's the point of the question, Main? Could you repeat the question?
Yes. About the should component update, we use this method when we have the props or state of component change. Is it right?
Is this method is triggered when next props or states changed? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So if if the props or state doesn't change, so the method will not be invoked, right?
Yes, I can say so. When component is changed, when props or state of the component is changed, component should be re-rendered. Yeah.
Yes.
Before it happens, this method is triggered, and this method returns just one Boolean value, true, false.
Yes, true, false.
And according to that, it will be rendered, or it will be re-rendered, or re-rendering will be skipped.
Yes,
so the decision of next action is inside this method. We can change, we can, for example, call API on etc. But it's not, it's something fantastic, but we just compare previous state and or props. For example, props is changed, true or false, etc. Something in each case it will be different, but the main point is that we decide should we re-render.
Yeah, I understand. Can you explain more about the pure component and component?
Okay.
We will talk about it a bit later.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and so because we discussed render, the approach is similar. This is actually the common phase. We will talk about get snapshot before update. Get snapshot before update is invoked right before the most recently rendered output is committed to the DOM. It enables your component to capture some information from the DOM, for example, scroll position, before it's potentially changed. Any value returned by this lifecycle method will be passed as a parameter to component did update here. This use cases isn't common, but it might occur in UIs like a chat threaded that needs to handle scroll position in a special way. A snapshot value a snapshot value will be returned, or it will be null. Yeah, we have example here. So as you could see here, in these cases, we have some values or returning null if the condition will not be, if the condition false. Then after get snapshot before update, we will, so once again, React updates DOM and refs, and next phase is this is a component did update, which is invoked immediately after updating occurs. That method isn't called for the initial render. Use this as an opportunity to operate on the DOM when the component has been updated. Yeah, here we have example. This is also a good place to do a network request, as long as you compare the current props and previous props. And here, so typically, so here we have a snapshot, which is might be, you know, you remember, right? So it might be some value or null. So if it not equal null, then we will, in this example, provide some new values to scroll top. We calculate it once again. So about set state, we might call set state immediately in this phase in component did update, but note that it must be wrapped in a condition like what? May I give examples some? So so if it, so let me think. Need to think about example, how to explain it. So you need just create some condition, right? Oh, sorry. You need to create some condition, like even, you know, even like in this example, if you would like to call infinite loop. Maybe for this example, infinite loop almost impossible, but if we put here some function, it will be possible, right? And it would also cause an extra render, which while not visible to the user can affect the component performance. If you're trying to mirror some state to a props coming from above, consider use the props directly instead. If your component implements the get snapshot before updates, which we discussed later lifecycle, the value its return will be passed as a source snapshot parameters to component did update, as I mentioned before. Yeah, otherwise it's a parameter, snapshot parameter will be undefined. So then, oh, sorry, not this, yeah, here. So about the unmounting phase, this method is called component view unmount. Is called when a component is being removed from the DOM. And component view unmount invoked immediately before a component is unmounted and destroyed. Perform any necessary cleanup in this method, such as invalidating timers, canceling network request, or cleaning up any subscription that were created in componented mount. So in the first phase, you shouldn't, as usual, you shouldn't call set state in component will update because the component will never be rendered. Once a component instance in a unmounted, it will never be mounted again. So, any questions about life cycle?
What is the difference between render and update DOM?
Mikhail?
I think he's left.
Oh, he's left. Well, then, okay, people, oh, you all have joined here. So differences between render and once, oh god, sorry. And once again, which?
Update DOM. React.
Render
DOM.
and update DOM?
Yep.
Give me a second, maybe. So DOM, this is like, object model, right? Render, it means changing. Maybe it's really rude, but, this is a process of changing something in virtual DOM, right? And pass these changes to DOM, so something like this.
So you mean that render happen in virtual DOM and update DOM happen in real DOM, right?
So not exactly like this, but so render, this is a React element into the DOM in a supplied container, right? And render return a reference to a component or returns null for stateless components. we will talk about a bit about stateless component. So render, this is like a part of, this is an element into the DOM. It's not something separate, but they are connected one to another.
Yes, so you mean that render is an object, right?
Yeah, React element, this is like object, so yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
But, you better also ask about this question, and mentors, they maybe provide you a bit more information. Okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Because I really bet I explain something with React. So also, I may recommend you, you know what, React.js.org render. Sorry that it's on not in English. A render. So here, rendering elements. Not like this. Yeah, into the DOM, right? This part, rendering an element into the DOM. So we've discussed, as I remember, a bit in the previous lesson. But I will put your article into a chat, okay? I will send you this link also, okay? So, let's go to the next. Sorry, it's incorrect, present. Once again, we will go to error handling. Okay, so about error handling, we really not so far from the pure component. So, but I need to find my notes about error handlers. Okay. So basically error handling, this is like what this is no, not like this. How to say sorry, I should find my notes about this. So yeah, unmuted. So this life cycle let's talk about get drives state from error. Usually it needs us in order to provide some errors notification in you know, with some kind of format, but usually it will return us the notification that that we faced with an error and message this error. It's if it should be short, right? But so React components that catch JavaScript errors that catch JavaScript errors anywhere in their child component tree log those errors and display a fallback UI instead of the component tree that crashed. Error boundaries catch errors. Error boundaries catch errors during rendering in lifecycle method and in constructor of the whole tree below them. A class component becomes an error boundary if it defines either of the lifecycle method, which is get drive state from error, and the component did catch. Updating state from these life cycles lets you compute an unhandled JavaScript error in a below tree and display a fallback UI. Only use error boundaries for everything for recovering from unexpected exceptions. Don't try use from control flow. And about get derived state from errors, usually this is static method. The life cycle is invoked after an error has been thrown by a descendant component. It receives the error that was thrown as a parameter and should return a value to update state. Get derived state error from get state from error is called during the render phase. So side effects are not permitted. From those use cases, use component did catch instead. That's why you see these two examples here. Component did catch. If the life cycle is invoked after the error has been thrown by descendant component, it receives two parameters, error and info. Error, the error that has thrown, and info, an object with a component stack, key containing information about which component threw the error. Component did catch is called during the commit phase. We didn't discuss about phases. There are three phases: render phase, pre-commit phase, and commit phase. Render phase pure and has no side effect. Pre-commit phase can read the DOM, and commit phase can work with DOM, run side effects, schedule updates, so on. What about component did catch? Yeah, so because they are called during the commit phase, side effects are permitted. And this and it should be used in order to log in some errors. In production and development builds of React, slightly different in the way component catch handle errors. On development, the error will bubbled up to window. This means that any window on error or window add event listener error callback. So if you're getting some putting some event listener errors callback, you will intercept the error that have been caught by componented catch. So next, React pure component, and yeah, let's talk about this. What is this React pure component? React pure component is pretty similar to React component. The differences between them is that React component doesn't implement should component update, but React pure component implements it with a shadow props and state comparison. If your React components render, function renders the same result given the same props and state, you can use React pure component for a performance boost in some cases. Here is the differences where how it renders and looks like in a React pure component. Then let's talk about stateful component and stateless components. In React, a stateful component is a component that holds some state. The stateless components by constant have no state. By constant, have no states. Note that both type of component can use props. Once again, the literally differences is that one has state and that other doesn't. Here we see the example of stateful components. Right? But for example, the differences that one of them, and here we have a stateless component, right? We see just usual component. This is two variant of how we can call them. And here just component with handle count. We have a state to do something with count value. So because it literally means that one of them has state and one of them doesn't have state, that means that stateful components are keeping track of changing data, while stateless component print out what is given to them via props, or they always render the same things. Yeah, so notice also that stateless component is written as a function. And as you could see that the component, one more, and also as cool as state is, you should always aim to make your components as simple as and stateless as possible. So different components can be reused like Lego pieces, even if you don't have immediate plan to reuse a component. The stateful ones should feel lucky to be so. When you should make components stateful or stateless? You probably won't know exactly how a component will turn out as soon as you start writing one. I will provide you some guidelines. So the best of them, few of them is a good, and this is like type out or visualize your website as if it were one component. Break it down from there into small components. And you'll need state somewhere when information dynamically changes, like a user's current favorite song or top scores. Aim to have a parent component keep all the information and pass it down to its stateless children components. What I should add about stateless or stateful components? This information, like for you should know what is it. I really recommend you read maybe a few more articles about it, because stateful component and stateless component, you will see them really often. And what about container components and presentational components? This is like just informal, not informal, just small information about these components. You just know that this exists. About, yeah. Once again. So there is a simple patterns which many React users find very useful when written React applications. If you've been doing React for a while, you have, so if you will be doing React for a while, you will be probably know the differences, might tell that container components or presentational components better to use in the application. Actually, I can't tell what is the differences presentational component or container components, but we might just talk about proofs, some classes of these components. So container components usually, let me think how to explain this part. So one more interesting thing is also that these container components and presentational components, you might also heard like fat and skinny. Maybe you've heard some articles or you saw some less tutorials about React components. If not, you might also hear about container components and presentational components like fat and skinny, smart and dump, stateful and pure, screen and component. Actually, in different articles is written by different ways, but definitely you might see that some kind of equivalent titles. And they are not exactly the same, but the core idea is similar. Container components are concerned with how thinking work, may contain both presential and container components inside, but usually don't have any DOM markup of their own except for some wrapping divs and never have any styles. Provide the data and behavior to presential or other container components. Call Flux actions and provide these as callbacks to presentational components. Then often they are stateful and they tend to serve as data courses, are usually generated using higher order component, which is such as connect from React Redux, create container from relay, or container create from Flux utils, rather than written by hand. Some examples of them, this is use page, hover sidebar, story container, followed user list, so on. And what about a presentational container? Like this. So they are also with presentational components are concerned with how things look, might contain both presentation and container components inside, and usually have some DOM markup and style of their own, often allows contained via these props children, have no dependencies on the rest of the application, such as Flux actions or stores, don't specify how the data is logged or mutated, receive data and callbacks exclusively via props, rarely have their own state, written as functional components, and the examples like page, sidebar, stores, use info, list. For example, these presentational components I saw many often, and previous examples like use pages, follower, sidebar, story container. Maybe I saw 2 of them. So interesting fact about it. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's enough about containers and presential component. And let's talk about event handler. Handling events with React element is very similar to handling events on DOM elements. There are some syntax differences, such as React events are named usual common case. You could see it here. So here, this is regular plain JavaScript. Button on click is from the small letter. And for React components, you could see it like a camel case. And with JSX, you pass a function as the event handler rather than string, right? So here is function, here is like a string passed function. Then, sorry for that, maybe you hear the sound. So another difference is that you cannot return false to prevent default behavior in React. You must call prevent default explicitly. For example, with a plain HTML, so we don't have here any example about it. So then that's enough about prevent default. Just know that you must call prevent default explicitly and cannot that the differences between JavaScript and React, this is you cannot return false to prevent default. Then about this example, when you define a component using ES6 class, a component pattern is for event handler to be a method on the class. For example, this foo class renders a button that lets user know that he is clicked on this button, right? And you have to be careful about the meaning of this in JS callbacks. So in JavaScript, class methods are not bound by default. If you forgot to bind this handle click and pass it to onClick, the keyword this will be undefined when the function is actually called. This is not React-specific behavior. It is a part of how functions work in JavaScript. Generally, if you refer to a method without circle. Why I always forgot this? Without brackets, square brackets, circle brackets after it, such as on click this handle click, you should bind that method like here. If colon bind annoys you, there are two ways how you can get around this. If you are using the experimental public class class field syntax, you can use class field to correctly bind callback. So So no, not like this, like this. So this syntax ensures this is bound without handle click, right? And warning, this is experimental syntaxes, like this, right? Yes, about this slide. If you are using class file syntaxes, you can use an arrow function in a callback, like here. Okay, so that's enough. Let's talk about forms in React. 1 second, please. My cat is here, so second. So I sent her to walk outside the room. Form in React. So where is my notes about form in React? So HTML4 element works a bit differently from other DOM elements in React because from elements naturally keep some internal state. For example, this is, do we have some? No, we don't have any examples actually. So let's talk. So if we have, for example, if the form one moment. So usually, you know, in the forms, as you might remember, that we are putting input. Maybe examples about this. No. So in plain.js, the form accept a single names, right? But if you would like, maybe you remember that, for example, for input tag, we might have the type, attribute, name, value, so on, right? So it will be in most cases, it's convenient to have a JavaScript function that handles to submission, for example, of the form and has access to the data that the user enter into the form. The standard way to achieve this is with the technical code control components. That's why you see here some important points. So the example with input forms was important because for not only for input elements, also for text area and select typically maintain their own state and update it based on user input. In React, mutable state is typically kept in the state property of components and only updates with set state. We can combine the two. We can combine the two by making the React state be the single source of truth, then the React component that renders or a form also controls what happened in a form on subsequent user input. An input from element whose value is controlled by React is in this way is called a controlled component.
I'm sorry, that why
Yeah.
is control component? Because I see it work like regular component. Why it has a special name?
Controlled component, are you talking about? Or
yes,
what?
Because I think it's work like it's try to keep track the state of user input and update every time the state change. So I think it work like a regular component, but in here it has a special name, control component.
I think what? So that, for example, you remember that, right? For an input, we might usually in plain JavaScript, right? We might put name and it will be static, right? We cannot change it. But for React, we might put this value to the state and change it depending on our needs. That's why I think it's one of the reasons why it's called controlled component.
Yeah, you mean that we can input the data directly to the state, right?
Yeah. Yes. So you might put your data to the form directly because from state value, for example, right?
Yeah.
So this is what is. So in this and this React component, right? So I'm talking about this state value. This is the changing or displaying value will also be for this value, this state value, and it's making the React state the source of truth, like here in this first item.
Yeah, it's good to know.
So since handle is, it's not good that we don't have example here. So about two next steps. So let's talk, what here. What is it? Update render element, React, JS org, forms. Yes, here. Maybe it will be just a bit easier. Forms with examples, okay? Here, so we talk about, I've provided you input with a name here, right? And in plain JS, we just call in this name and that's all, right? But for example, here in this example, if we write the same form using React, we will see that this value we might provide from state. So, and since the value attribute is set on our form element, the displayed element will be always a state value, and this is like making React state source of truth. So it means that it's always will be correct, right? And it's change in order to, if we change something on our form, it will be correct value here. Then use controlled component whenever possible, right? Why it's here? Because it's how to say. So it's a good approach, right? It's better to put some value from, for example, even from a state, because the actual state or form will be better. And controlled component has input element with a value attribute associated with a state and an event handler to update the specified state. About uncontrolled component, in most cases, using uncontrolled component to implement forms, it's really good to use it's really good to use controlled components to implement forms. In the controlled components, for data is handled by React components. The alternative is uncontrolled component, where from data is handled by the DOM itself. So that means why uncontrolled components store their data in a DOM and use ref attribute to read values. To write an uncontrolled components instead of write an element handler for every state update. You can use ref to get a value from the DOM. Since uncontrolled components kept the source of truth in a DOM, it is sometimes easier to integrate React and non-React code when using a controlled component. It can also be slightly less code if you want to be quick and dirty. Otherwise, you should usually use controlled components. So let's talk about refs. You might remember that we in previous lesson had the state after we create React element, right? And we talked that the first type, this is like the element which we would like to create. Then here in props, we will provide properties such as class name, ID, some children data here will be put in. It means, for example, we would like to create each one with hello world. So hello world will be in children. Key, unique key, which help us identify which is not. And as you remember in Visual DOM, it helps you to render only using keys, helping us identify which node we will render only, right? But not if you don't have keys, for example, in a list, right? The whole list will be re-rendered, right? But if you changed only one and and all items in the list have their keys, then it means that specific or exact items will be rendered in the list, right? And we talked that we will talk about refs a bit later. And so let's talk about it, that props are the only way that parent components interact with the children. To modify a children, you render it with new properties. However, it's just in different words, but almost the same of the example which I provide you just before. However, there are a few cases where you need to imperatively modify a children outside of the typical data flow. The children to be modified could be an instance of React component, or it could be DOM element. For both of these cases, React provides an escaped hatch. When we are using refs, not here again. There are a few good use cases for refs: managing focus, text selection, or media playback, triggering imperative animations, integrating with third-party DOM libraries. Please avoid using refs for anything that can't be done declaratively. For example, instead of exposing open and close method diagonal component pass. So it's better in order to another way. So instead of using open or close methods in dialog, for example, component, better to use some flags such as is open and provide changing their prop values in these variables. How to create refs. Refs are created using React create ref and attached to React element via ref attribute. Like here, right? So we create React ref attribute and attach it to ref attribute, right? Ref are commonly assigned to an instance property when a component is constructed when a component is constructed, so they can be referenced through the component. Then here in this example, callback refs. So this was one of the way how we can create refs, right? But there is another way how to set refs, which is called callback refs, which gives more fine-grained control over when refs are set and unset. Instead of passing ref attribute created by createRef, you pass a function. So like here, right? So we create an attribute ref, pass here a function, and here we providing a element. This function is this function is receiving a React component instead of HTML DOM element as its argument, which can be stored and accessed elsewhere. So should I add something here? Yes, so sounds like it's okay. warnings about callback refs. You can pass callback refs between components like you can with object refs that were created with React create ref. So like here, right? Here you have an input ref where was created arrow function with element which is provided input element the value. And in a custom text input, you receiving it from properties and provide as a ref attribute the value from properties. So parent passed its ref callback as an input ref to the custom text input, and then once again and the custom text input pass the same function as a special ref attribute in the input with and a result with this input element in parent here, right, will be set to the DOM node corresponding to the input element in the custom text input. Forwarding refs. So about this topic. So what time do we have? Okay, seems like almost fragments. Book portal, we leave more. Okay. Let's talk about fragment or forwarding refs. We stopped here. So just should tell you that I need more 30 minutes. Will it be okay, guys?
Sorry, I don't get that.
Yeah, I need 30 minutes more, and then we will finish.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, so may I ask, 3-minute break, okay? And maybe not 5 minutes, okay? And we will try to put our rest data up in 25 minutes, okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, thanks. So I'm back. So shall we continue?
Yeah, we should continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Then I forgot that it will be, you know, from scratch if I present. Play from beginning. No, I would like to play it here. React component, call back ref here somewhere. Yeah. Forwards and refs. Okay. So we are discussed that we might create ref using React create ref, right? So here we let's imagine that we creating some component and would like to create in this component custom button with a ref in order to click to this button, right? And here in the sort, picture, custom button, this is ref forward ref. What is it? This is so custom button. This is a button, like let's call it fancy button. And this let's call this custom button like a fancy button. And what I would like to say that fancy button component renders the native button DOM element, right? This button. React component hide their implementation details, including their render output. Other components using fancy button usually will not need to obtain a ref. Other components using fancy button not need to be obtain a ref to the inner button DOM element. This is good because it's prevent component from rely on each other's DOM structure too much. Also, such encapsulation is desirable to application level component like some store or component. It can be inconvenient for highly reusable leaf component like fancy button or some other buttons, right? Or some other forms there. This component tends to be used through the application in a similar manner and regular DOM button, and for example, also input and access their DOM nodes might be avoidable for naming focus, selection, or animation. Ref forwarding is an opt-in feature that lets some component takes a ref they receive and pass in further down. In other words, forward it to a child. So like here in this example, right? This way component using so we are getting refs here, putting it to the child, this, right? For a fancy button, just sending it by a chain. Here is a So how it works? We create React ref by calling React forward ref, by calling React create ref, and assign it to a ref variable here. We pass out ref down to, we create in React ref element and passing it to a ref. Then we pass our ref down to our custom button here to the ref by specifying it as a G6 attribute. Then React passed the ref to props ref here. Function instead forward ref as a second argument here. We forward this ref argument down to button by specifying it as a G6 attribute ref. When this ref is attached, ref current will point to the button DOM node. So the second ref argument only exists when you define a component when you define a component with React forward call. Regular function or class component doesn't receive the ref argument, and ref isn't available in props either. Such ref forwarding isn't limited to DOM components. You can forward refs to class component instances. You can forward refs to class component instances too. So this is benefits, right? Let's talk to fragment. Fragments, a common, a common pattern in React is for a component to return multiple elements. Fragments let you group a list group a list of children without adding extra nodes to the DOM. Let's take a look, for example, this list component. Here, list component will be return multiple elements in order to the rendered HTML to the valid. If a parent, I'm not sure. Yeah, if parents here, for example, if we have parents, or for sometimes we might here, for example, for this list, we don't need any parents like div, right? So should be some example. This is incorrect because if we don't have any div parents, we inside the render, right? So then the result will be invalid without this div. So it's necessary to use. And in order to if you would like not use div for like in these cases, because it's really will be interesting looking if you, in your UL element will be inside div, and then in div you will see the li elements. So React fragment helps you to solve this problem. This is how you could see this short syntaxes. This is a new short syntax you can use for declaring fragments. It looks like an empty text. you can use empty text the same way you'd use any other elements, except that is doesn't support keys or attributes. Here, for example, fragment declarated this declarated with explicit React fragment. Syntax may have keys. A use case for this is mapping a collection to an array of fragment, for example, to create a description. So here, this is for columns, as I remember. So here, in this case, we might create React fragments with a key element. Key is only attribute that can be passed to fragment. In the future, we will add support for, we will talk how to support additional attributes, such event bundlers. So let's talk about composition.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you mean that a component cannot return multiple elements? Right.
Are you talking about this?
The reverse one.
This?
The first image.
Is it?
Yeah. So.
So I'm talking about if you try to render such elements, right? If you try to put this element without div, you can't do this, actually. You will see some errors, handle errors or something like this in the console. If you would like to put this element into something additional, into their parents UL tag element, right? You need to use this syntaxes or this.
When we use React fragment, do it create a new parent when it's come to when it render to HTML file?
I actually don't remember, but you will see something. This is a short version, right? As I remember, in your console log, you shouldn't see this text. You just see UL, and inside UL, you will see Lee child 1, Lee child 2, Lee child 3.
Yes. Okay. I understand that now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So about composition, try to cover some topics. About composition. So React has a powerful composition model, and and usually, especially React or JS, recommend using composition instead of inheritance to reuse code between components. Let's take a look at the containment problem. So there are a few as new developers in React faced with some problems with inheritance, and there are some examples how to solve them with composition. Sorry, containment. This is some not like this. How to explain this? Some components don't know their children ahead of time. So, and this is especially common for components like for sidebar or dialog with replacement generic boxes. Usually recommend that such component use the special children props to pass children element directly into their output. So like here, we just have here some border, element and pass in color, right? And what here also? Here should be returned a div element with class name, fancy border with name of the color. And if you would like to put this all elements inside this div, you need to pass it using props children. So that if you will use such approach, that lets other component pass attribute children to them by nesting the J6. Anything inside the fancy border J6 text pass into the fancy border function, right? Component as a child properties. Since fancy border renders props children inside a div, the passed element appears in the final output. Specialization. So sometimes we think about component as being special cases of other components. For example, we might say that welcome dialog is a special case of dialog, right? So we just, for welcome dialog component, create something special with a dialog. In React, this is also achieved by composition, where a more specific component renders a more generic one and configure it with groups, with props, like here. So this is more specific, right? So this is more general component dialog, right? We might configure him using provide some title or message, and a welcome dialog, just to we create new dialog and provide it here to additional information. So composition is, you know, they are working really good for both components, for really good working for components which is created by classes, by also also you might face it like a functional component and it will work good too, but better to use for classes, because you might why? Because you might increase your component with many additional functions or methods in order to provide more extended classes or common classes. Okay, render. Is it? I'm not switched. Yes. Render props. Yeah, if you would like to so for data provider, we might render these properties using like putting render like key argument and putting there a data. Why it's put in here? Okay. Yeah, so for the argument, we might provide some properties for render using these syntaxes. Let's go to high order components. So high order components, this is advanced technique in React for reusing component logic. higher order components are not part of React API. They are patterns that emerge from React's compositional nature. This component will add more logic to logic to existing component. Here, this example so let's how to say so if you have some classes or maybe functions, React's components, so it's really, and you would like to change something inside, so please, it might be not a good idea if you would like to change, modify or change a component's prototype or otherwise mutate it inside of high-ordered components. There are a few problems with this. One is that the input component can be reused separately from the enhanced component. More crucially, if you apply another high-order component to enhanced components that also mutated a component did update, the first high-order component functions will be overridden. This high-order component also won't work with function components which don't have lifecycle methods. Mutating high-order components are a leak abstraction. The consumer must know how they are implemented in order to avoid conflict with other high-order functions. So the high-order component has the same functionality as the mutated version while avoiding the potential for clashes. Seems, yeah, for the clashes. Yeah, wrap a component in state of mutation, as we discussed, as I told you a little bit more. So here, here we have a high-order component which is, we've created log properties, right? And we inheritant will log whatever props are received. And it's really good if we just see the changes that we return classes, which is extend React component. We wrap our changes in a component, and instead of mutating it, right, like here, and it will be better wrapped component use. We will easily to change the properties with mutating it. So and here about I forgot what. Yeah, so high order component and features to a component, right? And they shouldn't drastically alter its contract. It's expected that the component returned from high-order component has a similar interface of the wrapped component. High-order component should pass those properties, and we have properties here. No. So render here about okay, here should be actually must. So we might also add to a render component some properties, specific properties, inject these properties into wrapped component, where is usually state values or instance methods provided, and pass these properties to wrapped components. Here it might be just more additional changes, right? But what if we you know, what if we talk about, let's talk about caveats. So sometimes high order components come with a few caveats that aren't immediately obvious if you're new in React. Don't use high order component, instead the render method. Normally you shouldn't need to think about this, but it matters for high ordered component because it means you can't apply high order component to a component within the render method for a component, like in this example. The problem here is isn't about performance. Remounting a component causes the state of that component and all of its children to the lost. Instead, apply high order components outside the component, defining so that the resulting component is created only once. Then its identity will be consistent across renders. This is usually what you want anyway. And portals, almost done. We'll talk about portals, about some approaches and context. So portals provide the first class way to render children into a DOM node that exists outside the DOM hierarchy of the parent component. So you might create portals using React DOM create portal, provide childs and container where so child, this is the first argument, and how to say, this is the first element which will be rendered in a React child element, such as element string or fragment. And the second argument, this is a container, is a DOM element. Where we can use them. Normally, when we return an element from components render method, it's mounted into the DOM. Normally, okay. Skipped. Seems like okay. Normally, if we returns an element from components render method, it's mounted into a DOM as a child to the nearest parent node, like so. Here in this, we create a portal. How to use this, right? We create React random create portal model content. This is what we would like to use like a children to a model root. Model root. This is create in a document will be created element with ID model root, and we put into the model root element model content, right? With a div with a class which is called model. Something like this, for example, right? We put in here in this model root div, new div. So even those on a portal can be anywhere in DOM tree, it behaves like a normal React child in every other way. Features like context work exactly the same regardless of whether the children is a portal, as the portal still exists in the React tree regardless of position in a DOM tree. This includes event bubbling. An event fired from inside a portal will propagate to ancestor in a container React tree, even if those elements are not ancestors in a DOM tree. Assuming the following HTML structure, like in the previous screens, we have in a body root, model root, where we would like to put our new div, right? And these two containers I'm talking about, root and model root, they are siblings, right? They are not parent and child, they are siblings. And here, what we have, the same actually. Imagine that we portals event bubbling, we will render with DOM React DOM portals in a root, model root, with our model content, which is right now it's a button in a div. And when we click on our, when we would like to, in our application, we have a div with such functionality. If we click on this div, we will see alert hello, and then we will see our model. So if we put our model content inside the render, the click event on this button will bubble up to parent because there is no onClick attribute defined, right? Like here. Catching an event bubbling up from the portals in a parent component allows the developers of more flexible abstractions that are not inherently reliant on portals. For example, if you render a model component, the parents can capture its events regardless of whether it's implemented using portals. Let's take a look about React Flow. let's using flow data. So I will skip this for this lesson, and we will back for the React data flow on the next, okay? I will promise you this. I will also send you the link to this article, but with React data flow, we will talk about it on the next lesson. I just wanted to talk you about context. Context provides a way to pass data through the component tree without having to pass properties down manually at every level. In a typical React application, data is passed top-down, parents to child via properties, but such uses can be cumbersome for certain types of properties that are required by many components within an application. When to use context? Context is designed to share data that can be considered global for a tree of React component, such as the current authentication user or team, or preventing languages, for example. For example, in the code below, we will, let me just, yeah, so for example here, in this code, yeah, we'll put all three items. We create team context, we will create theme context, team context with using React create context with some default value, and the and you know what? Context lets us pass a value deep into the component tree using such methods. For example, default value will be light or dark, don't know. And the context pass the value deep into the component tree without explicitly threading in those every component. Create a context for the current team. Here is default value, and I don't remember where we defined. No. Let's talk that we provide to this default value some team default, maybe red, blue, white, light team. And if we in a team context provider, we did no, not like this. We are using provider to pass the current team to the tree below. So any component can read it, no matter how deep it is. It is example where passing. We are passing this state team, which just come up to us from our state. And team context consumer. Context consumer, we are using in order to subscribe to some context changes. Using this component lets us subscribe a context within a function component. So yeah, consumer. Yeah, we creating here a context in order to switch toggle team. We will switch this toggle team in our consumer. Consumer will subscribe to our changes and let us know that the default value should change to some specific changes. So that's all for today. I should tell you about React data flow on the next meeting. just keep a little bit it because no have a time, unfortunately. Yeah, turn the camera. So thanks for watching today. I know it was pretty long, but unfortunately it was a lot of information. Also, I tried to provide you a few links, which I like to read some specific articles, topics from these lessons for today. So that's all from my side. Please pass all questions to your mentors. Unfortunately, from my side, it will be definitely difficult or a long time to answer. Yeah, so, and please, if you're trying to use some examples, I stop sharing and I stop recording.